When the Bible talks about the story of the woman at the well, it talks about Jesus traveling there. John chapter 4, verse 4 says he left Judea, departed again for Galilee, and he had to pass through Samaria. Now, when the Bible says Jesus had to pass through Samaria to get to Galilee, it wasn't meaning geographically. In fact, people would go out of their way to avoid Samaria. Instead of going straight through from Judea all the way to Galilee and Samaria being in the middle, they would travel a long ways around to come to Galilee. Rabbis especially would make sure that they didn't have to go through Samaria. But we see Jesus having to pass through. Why? Divine appointment, divine necessity. This is why he had to go through Samaria. He had an appointment with a woman who didn't know she had an appointment with him. In fact, Jesus had to break down many walls just to get to this woman at the well. Just to have her even engage in conversation would have been a scandal worthy of TMZ. We see a couple things, barriers that Jesus pushes down, walls that he blasts through. Number one, the first external wall is the racial and ethnic wall. Samaritans and Jews had more bad blood than a Taylor Swift song. In fact, there was a 500-year-old beef between them. They argued about their origins, where they came from. They argued about where to worship. The Jews said the temple in Jerusalem. The Samaritans said, no, the temple in Mount Gerizim. The Jews destroyed the Samaritans' temple, and then the Samaritans came back with retaliation of their own and scattered dead men's bones in the middle of the night during Passover, so they couldn't celebrate. There was such bad blood between these two groups of people. So much so, in fact, that for Jesus to even talk to this woman, to acknowledge her, that would have been scandalous. One rabbi said, "May I never set eyes on a Samaritan." They couldn't even look at each other. They couldn't stand the sight of each other. Have you ever had someone you avoided? Maybe an ex-girlfriend or boyfriend, and if you saw them coming, you'd run the other way. Some people like that we're wearing masks now because if you see somebody that you know, you can pretend you don't, and maybe they won't recognize you when half your face is covered. Maybe it's that friend of yours who's always reaching out to you on Instagram for their newest multi-level marketing scheme. There's people in our life we avoid, friends who've betrayed us, that person coughing in the grocery store. Well, Samaritans and Jews avoided each other like this. They want to have nothing to do with each other. Their law, the Jews' law even said Samaritans were viewed as being unclean. And to share a cup with this person, for Jesus to ask this woman for a drink of water, that would have been unheard of. That would have broken some of the Levitical understandings of the law that they had written. And yet we see Jesus breaking through this wall, not allowing this religious and this ethnic cultural barrier to prevent him from reaching this woman where she was at. Another wall Jesus blasts through to get to her is the wall of gender. In that culture, men were not allowed to greet women in public. In fact, if a Jewish rabbi was with his wife, he couldn't even acknowledge her in public or even have a conversation with her. That would have been deemed too scandalous. There was a sect of the Pharisees called the bruised and the bleeding. Now, that's a strange name. Why were they called this? Well, they were so committed to personal piety and holiness that if they saw even the shadow of a woman or even the glimpse of what they thought might have been a woman, they would have to close their eyes and they would keep walking until, they bumped into something or someone, and they would get bruises and then they would get cuts on themselves because they were trying to prevent looking at a woman. And here's Jesus talking to a woman who is of despised ethnicity, and a woman who is not from his family. He wasn't even supposed to make eye contact with her. And yet Jesus humbles himself, and he doesn't let her gender stop him from calling her to himself, to salvation. Jesus accepts this woman despite all the external barriers, despite all the walls that should have kept them separated. And today, God reaches out into the world, and despite all the walls and the barriers that each of us have, maybe things that we chose for our life and things that we didn't. This woman didn't choose to be a Samaritan. She didn't choose to be a woman. Those things, those external identifiers, they didn't matter to Jesus. What mattered was this woman's heart, was this woman's salvation, was this woman coming to know him. So maybe you're like Jesus, or maybe you're like this woman. Are you like Jesus and you're trying to reach people, but you're looking at all the reasons you have to avoid them? All the reasons you have to not trust them or to keep your distance? Maybe God's calling you to blast through some of those walls today, those external things that would keep you from sharing the gospel. Or maybe you're like this woman at the well and you think, I don't want to have anything to do with Christianity. And you have all these walls and reasons why you shouldn't encounter God. You shouldn't even try to learn more about him. Today, Jesus is reaching through those walls, and he's inviting you and he is inviting me into relationship with him.